3 months. That's how long Skanderbeg had been back in Albania when the Ottoman Empire decided it had seen enough. 3 months since the desertion at Niš. 3 months since the forged letter and the fortress of Kruj. 3 months since he had raised the Black Eagle over the walls and sent word to every Albanian lord he knew that the moment had come. In those 3 months he had done something nobody thought was possible. He had gotten the Albanian lords to stop fighting each other long enough to sign an alliance. The League of Legia. March 2, 1444. 12 Albanian noble families in the same room, agreeing on something for the first time in living memory. Murad II heard about it, and Murad II sent Ali Pasha. Ali Pasha was not a second-tier commander. He was one of Murad's most trusted generals, the kind of man you send when you want something finished quickly and permanently. He left Skopje in June 1444 with somewhere between 25 and 40,000 soldiers. Infantry. Sipahi cavalry. Auxiliary units. A force assembled with one specific purpose: to find this Albanian rebellion, crush it completely, and make sure nobody in the Balkans had any ideas about what happened when you defected from the Ottoman army and came home with a forged letter. Skanderbeg had 15,000 men. He had something else too. He had chosen the battlefield. This episode is where the fighting starts. If you haven't seen episode 1, go back and watch it first. The story hits completely differently when you know who this man is and what it cost him to get here. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video if you're staying. Because what Skanderbeg did on June 29, 1444, is one of the most tactically brilliant things I have ever studied. Let's get into it. Before a single sword was drawn at Torviol, Skanderbeg had already won half the battle. He won it with information. The League of Legia had scouts moving through Albanian territory from the moment the alliance was formed. Not soldiers, scouts. Men who knew the mountains, knew the valleys, knew the roads that Ottoman armies used, because there weren't that many roads that could support an army of 40,000 in this terrain. When Ali Pasha left Skopje and began moving southwest toward Albania through the Black Drine Valley, Skanderbeg knew about it. He knew the route. He knew approximately how many men. He knew the pace of the march. And he used all of that information to do something that separated him from every other commander the Ottomans had faced in this region. He didn't wait for Ali Pasha to come to him. He went to Ali Pasha. To a place of his own choosing. The plain of Torviol, also known as the plain of Shumbat, in the region of Lower Dibra, north of Peshkopi. Skanderbeg had chosen it himself. He had walked it probably multiple times. He knew its dimensions precisely: 11 kilometers long, 5 kilometers wide, surrounded on all sides by hills and dense forest. It looked like open ground, the kind of terrain that favored a larger force with more cavalry. It looked like exactly the kind of place an Ottoman commander would want to fight. That was the point. He paid his soldiers. He held religious services for them, a detail that Barlady records specifically, and that tells you something about how Skanderbeg understood the psychology of men about to fight against enormous odds. Then he marched them through the Black Drine Valley and arrived at Torviol before Ali Pasha. He was there first, waiting, on ground he had selected. "We fight where I have chosen," he told his commanders, standing at the edge of the plain looking at the hills that surrounded it. Not where they would have us fight. His commanders looked at the open ground and said nothing. They trusted him. They had to. Ali Pasha arrived and made camp on the plain opposite the Albanian position. He looked at what was across from him, 15,000 men significantly outnumbered by his own force, and he did what confident commanders do when the numbers favor them completely. He celebrated. Barlady records this detail with the particular satisfaction of a man describing the era that preceded a catastrophe. The Ottoman camp that night was loud. Fires burning. Soldiers eating well. Officers drinking. The certain knowledge that tomorrow they would crush a rebellion that had lasted, at this point, less than 6 months. Parties of Ottoman soldiers actually crossed to the edge of the Albanian camp to taunt Skanderbeg's men, shouting insults, provoking, daring them to come out and fight. The Albanian camp was completely silent. No fires. Not one. Skanderbeg had ordered every fire extinguished at dusk. The men who weren't on guard were sleeping, ordered to rest, conserve their strength, be ready for dawn. The men on guard did not respond to the Ottoman taunts. They said nothing. They stood in the dark and waited. Skanderbeg spent that night doing what he had done for 20 years in the Ottoman system. He was thinking. He had already placed 3,000 cavalry, under 5 commanders, Hamza Castrioti, Mazaka of Angelina, Zakaria Gropa, Peter Emanueli, and John Mazaka, in the forests surrounding the plain. Hidden. Completely invisible to the Ottoman scouts who had checked the tree line and found nothing because Skanderbeg's men knew how to disappear into Albanian forest in a way that Ottoman scouts from Skopje did not. Those 3,000 men had one order: do not move until you hear the signal. Whatever happens on the plain, whatever you see, whatever sounds you hear, do not move until the signal. Not before, Skanderbeg had told Hamza Castrioti specifically, his cousin and one of his most trusted commanders. No matter what it looks like. Not before the signal. And if it looks bad? Asked Hamza. Then it's working, said Skanderbeg. Thought. Skanderbeg arranged his army on the plain. 8,000 cavalry, 7,000 infantry. A force that looked to Ali Pasha watching from across the plain, exactly like what it was, a smaller army preparing to fight a larger one on open ground. Ali Pasha organized his forces with the confidence of a man who has done this before and expects a predictable result. Ottoman Sipahi cavalry on the flanks. Infantry in the center. The weight of numbers arrayed to overwhelm. The battle began. Skanderbeg's main force engaged. The fighting was real, there was nothing feigned about the initial contact, and Barlady records that men died on both sides from the first minutes. The Ottoman weight was enormous. 40,000 against 15,000 on open ground should have only one result. And then Skanderbeg's center began to fall back. Not breaking, falling back. Controlled. Disciplined. The Albanian cavalry and infantry retreating toward the narrower end of the plain where the hills pressed in on both sides and the forest came closer to the edge of the flat ground. The Ottomans saw the retreat and did exactly what Skanderbeg had predicted they would do. They pursued. Ali Pasha's forces moved forward in mass, the entire weight of the Ottoman army pressing into the pursuit, the cavalry pushing ahead, the infantry following, the rear units rushing to keep up with the front. The discipline that had kept them in formation on the open plain began to loosen in the excitement of what looked like a collapsing enemy. They moved into the narrower ground. The hills on both sides got closer. The plain compressed. The Ottoman formation, which had been wide and overwhelming, was now funneling into a narrower front without anyone having made the conscious decision to do so. "They're retreating," an Ottoman officer called from the front. "They're breaking." They were not breaking. Skanderbeg gave the signal. From the forests on both sides of the plain, 3,000 Albanian cavalry erupted simultaneously. 5 commanders, 5 positions, attacking the Ottoman wings and rear at the same moment from directions Ali Pasha's men had no reason to be watching because they had checked that tree line the night before and found nothing. The Ottoman formation, which had been pushing forward into the narrowing plain, compressed and loosened by the pursuit, suddenly had enemies on 3 sides. Front, both flanks, rear. Barlady describes what happened next with the language of a man trying to convey chaos to readers who weren't there. The Ottoman mass charges, the tactic that had worked against almost everything the empire had faced in this region, faltered immediately against a multi-directional assault that their hierarchical command structure had no procedure for handling. Ali Pasha's commanders were experienced in fighting armies that came at them. They were not experienced in fighting an army that was simultaneously in front of them, beside them, and behind them, on ground that prevented them from spreading out to create space. Skanderbeg's main force, the one that had been retreating, stopped, turned around, charged. The Ottoman center, which had been pursuing what looked like a broken enemy, suddenly found that enemy charging directly back at them while everything else they had was being cut apart from the sides and rear. It held for a while. Ottoman soldiers were not cowards and Ali Pasha was not incompetent. The fighting in the center of the plain was brutal, close, grinding, the kind of combat where the numbers still mattered and Skanderbeg's men paid for every yard in blood. Barlady records Albanian casualties at several thousand. Modern historians estimate between 104,000 Albanian dead, depending on which sources they weight most heavily. But the flanks were collapsing. The rear was collapsing. And an army that is collapsing on 3 sides, on ground it cannot spread out to defend, eventually reaches the moment where individual survival becomes more pressing than collective formation. That moment came for the Ottomans on June 29, 1444, somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, when the first units began to break and run and the breaking spread through the Ottoman mass the way breaking always spreads, faster than anyone expects, impossible to stop once it starts. "They're running," said one of Skanderbeg's cavalry commanders, barely believing what he was seeing. Skanderbeg was already moving. "After them," he said. "Every pass. Every road. No one leaves this plain in formation." Skanderbeg ordered the pursuit immediately and personally led part of it. This was not standard practice. Commanders of the period often let routed armies go. The risk of a pursuit turning into its own disorder was real, and a controlled victory was worth more than a total one that cost you half your force in the chasing. Skanderbeg had been trained in the Ottoman system. He knew exactly what a routed Ottoman army could reorganize into if given space and time. He gave them neither. Albanian cavalry sealed the passes through the surrounding hills, the escape routes that Ottoman survivors would naturally move toward. The pursuit lasted for miles beyond the plain itself, Albanian warriors overtaking and destroying disorganized Ottoman units that had no formation, no coordination, and no idea where their commanders were. The baggage train was captured. Supplies that the Albanian forces badly needed, food, weapons, equipment, seized from an army that had brought enough for a campaign it expected to finish in days. 24 Ottoman banners were taken. Barlady, whose numbers trend toward the heroic, records 22,000 Ottoman dead and 2,000 prisoners. Modern historical analysis, accounting for what is plausible given the forces involved, estimates somewhere between 7 and 10,000 Ottoman dead, still a catastrophic loss for the force that had entered Albania. Albanian dead, estimates range from 100 to several thousand. The asymmetry is real, and it comes directly from the terrain, the ambush, and the fact that a force fighting on ground it has chosen, in a formation it has prepared, against an enemy moving in disorder, suffers fundamentally differently than the enemy does. When Ali Pasha returned to Adrianople, the Ottoman capital, he stood before Murad II and explained the defeat. He said the loss should be attributed to the fortunes of war, not to his generalship. Murad II listened. Then he started planning the next campaign. 25,000 to 40,000 soldiers, sent by the most powerful empire in the known world, destroyed on a plain in Albania by a man with 15,000. If you're watching this and you've never heard of Skanderbeg before this series, that's the whole point of why this channel exists. Stories this extraordinary should not be sitting in obscurity. Subscribe, like the video, and stay with me, because Murad II is not done. Not even close. The Battle of Torviol on June 29, 1444, was not just a military victory. It was a proof of concept. For 20 years, the Ottoman Empire had operated on a specific assumption in the Balkans, that no local force, no matter how motivated, could defeat an Ottoman army in a pitched battle. The empire's military superiority was so well established that it had become a psychological fact, something that didn't need to be argued because it had been demonstrated repeatedly enough that everyone simply accepted it. Skanderbeg had just demonstrated that the assumption was wrong. The news spread through Europe with a speed that tells you how hungry the continent was for exactly this information. Pope Eugenius IV, who had been watching the Ottoman advance with the mounting anxiety of a man who can see where this is going, heard about Torviol and immediately began discussing a new crusade. John Hunyadi, the Hungarian commander whose operations at Niš had given Skanderbeg the cover for his desertion in the first place, sent congratulations and began exploring alliance. Venice, which had complicated relationships with both the Ottomans and the Albanian lords, started paying very close attention to what was happening in these mountains. "They are calling him the Dragon of Albania," said a Venetian merchant who had been traveling through the region when the news broke, in a letter that survives in the Venetian archives. "I have seen the celebration in the villages. I have seen what the soldiers look like when they return. This man is real." He was real. And he had just fought his first battle against the Ottoman Empire. He would fight 24 more. There is one more thing that happened in the aftermath of Torviol that matters for the story, something that Barlady records and that historians have tended to treat as a footnote, but which was actually a piece of political engineering as deliberate as the ambush at Torviol itself. Skanderbeg married Danica Arianidi, the daughter of George Arianidi, one of the most powerful Albanian lords, a man whose territory covered significant parts of central Albania, and whose support for the League of Legia was valuable but not unconditional. A man who needed a reason to stay committed to an alliance built around a leader who had been away for 20 years and had, so far, won exactly one battle. The marriage was a political act. Both parties understood it as such. But Barlady describes Danica with a specificity that suggests she was more than a diplomatic instrument. A woman of intelligence and strong character who understood exactly what she was marrying into and made the choice with clear eyes. She knew what kind of man he was, wrote Barlady, and she chose him anyway. The Arianidi commitment to the League deepened. The alliance that had been built in a cathedral in March and tested on a plain in June now had a family connection running through its center. Skanderbeg had won the first battle. He had built the first alliance. He had married into the second one. Murad II was already organizing the next campaign.